Oh, hi! You caught me creating an amazing meal. I'm no great chef, but you know who was? Anthony Bourdain. Let's talk about his comics today.
Comic tropes. Comic tropes.
Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Sadly, Anthony Bourdain died this past week, and a lot of people will remember him, of course, as a world-renowned chef, as a novelist, and of course for his travel show in which he explored new cultures and tried new foods. But not as many people know that his original dream was to be a comic book creator. At 2017's New York Comic-Con, Bourdain appeared on a panel to promote his new book with Dark Horse Comics, and he talked about his love of comics. He'd grown up a massive fan of EC's science fiction and horror comics of the 50s and the underground comics of guys like Robert Crumb. He actually pitched his work to publisher Dennis Kitchen at a comic convention in the 70s, but Kitchen said his artwork just wasn't good enough. Bourdain later pitched his work to Joel Rose, who had a fanzine in the 80s. Rose said the art wasn't good enough, but the writing was well done. They became friends, and in 2012, they co-wrote an original graphic novel called Get Jiro for DC Comics' Vertigo imprint. So today I wanted to talk to you about Get Jiro, as well as some other comics written by celebrity comic book creators, because they actually have several things in common. For instance, just looking at the cover, we can see that Get Jiro is co-written by Anthony Bourdain and his friend Joel Rose, a professional writer. Other examples of this include Monty Python alum John Cleese assisting Kim Howard Johnson with the graphic novel Superman True Brit, Samuel Jackson working with TV writer Eric Calderon on Cold Space, and rapper and actor Tyrese working with writers Will Wilson and Mike Lee to create Mayhem. We'll look at some more examples later. Get Jiro is set in a near future where Americans' entertainment industries, from film to music, have grown stagnant, and the most popular thing in the world is dining in nice restaurants. The comic is a satire of the food industry while simultaneously being a love letter. The story focuses on the soft-spoken Jiro, who runs his own sushi shop in the outer ring of the city. In this world, chefs hold immense power. So when a rude customer dunks Jiro's sushi in wasabi and then asks for California rolls, Jiro casually slices his head off. The police later comment on how that's the third time this week, but they make no arrests. If you've read Anthony Bourdain's book Kitchen Confidential, you'll know that in his opinion, chefs very much are treated like rock star celebrities, at least in their own kitchens, at least in their own restaurants. So Bourdain sort of takes that idea and extrapolates it into a power fantasy of sorts, where a chef can literally get away with murder as long as it's, against a rude customer or something like that. It's justified. The comic is dark and satirical, and when it's combined with the clean line work and detailed backgrounds and panels of artist Langdon Foss, I'm actually reminded of Hard Boiled by Frank Miller and Jeff Darrow. I think that there are definite similarities there. The setting and use of humor makes me think how comics written by celebrities frequently take advantage of something they're already famous for. Stories by comedians using humor, like Brian Posehn's Deadpool, Guardians Team Up by Paul Scheer, or Bill Hader and Seth Meyers' Spider-Man: The Short Halloween. There are stories about wrestling by CM Punk, or music by Rage Against the Machine's Tom Morello. In my opinion, Get Jiro taps into Anthony Bourdain's knowledge of other cultures and cooking styles. That's kind of obvious, but it also uses his love of subversive humor, a lot like you'd see in the underground comics of the 60s and 70s that he grew up with. When Jiro kills the rude customer, he's drawn into a larger world. It turns out the customer was a supplier of a lot of ingredients from South America for one of the two big chefs that vie for control of the city. He worked for Bob, who has a deep knowledge and love of cooking, but is willing to turn out mass-produced garbage for the willing patrons that he looks down on. Bob represents the globalized mass-market approach to cooking. The other chef is Rose, who operates her organization like a cult, insisting on only locally sourced ingredients and only serving vegetarian dishes, while hypocritically enjoying meat behind closed doors. Rose is essentially a parody of the hipster foodie. Both chefs make a move to recruit Jiro, who ultimately touches off a type of gang war, pitting the two forces against one another. Get Jiro has action, intrigue, and while the villains are buffoonish, they're also shown to be very capable and knowledgeable cooks who just went down dark paths. There are panels that show the true joy and love of cooking unique dishes like French meats and vegetables cooked in pig's blood, delicately cooked duck, careful preparation of fish, and more. Can I discern what Bourdain's goals were with this book? Not necessarily. I can tell you that I enjoyed it. It's tremendously entertaining. So I enjoy it on that level. Does it operate on a deeper level? Maybe talking in a meaningful way about the modern restaurant experience or something along those lines? Possibly, but if it does, that's going over my head because I'm not really a foodie. I'm not plugged into that culture. But I do love traveling, something else that Bourdain loved, and I think that there's a deep and abiding respect for a lot of different cultures that does shine through in this book, so I do appreciate that. One example is the time taken in a scene where Jiro visits his closest friend, a French cook who operates out of a type of speakeasy restaurant. There's also a lot of attention to detail in how a traditional sushi chef operates. One scene that stands out is how he carefully paralyzes a fish to keep it fresh longer, and later, how he slices it apart. If Jiro has talent beyond simply making great food, it's his skill with a knife. When some thugs come to intimidate him, he cuts off an arm. But he doesn't just hack it. No, he cuts it so fast and clean that the bone inside is still intact. It's so impressive that one of the other thugs isn't even mad, just seriously impressed. So there may be other levels that you can appreciate this story on, but for me, I appreciate the escalating stakes as Jiro pits two sides against each other and tries to remain in the middle. It's pretty exciting, fun stuff. I also get a tremendous kick out of the world building. For instance, there's a scene of criminals mugging a man, but then they find out that he has reservations at an especially prestigious restaurant. This impresses them so much, they return his wallet and send him on his way so that he doesn't miss out on his dinner reservation. And there are a lot of Bourdain's personal tropes, things he mentions a lot in his books and show. Foie gras, sustainability, and proper food etiquette. My personal favorite moment is when Jiro tricks a group of people into wearing towels over their heads so that they can't see what he's secretly doing. He does this under the guise of serving them ortolan, a very real and very illegal dish. The dish involves catching an ortolan bird, placing it in darkness so that it keeps eating and growing to at least twice its normal size. Then it's drowned in armagnac, which also marinates it. The bird is roasted for 8 minutes, plucked of its feathers, and the diner eats the bird whole, feet first. The tradition of the towel has been debated. It's either to keep the scent in or to shield the eater from God's eyes because of the nature of the deed. Now, I'm no chef like Bourdain, but let me share a recipe with you that I invented. You take some fettuccine and you start eating it, and then you soften it up and flavor it with some Pam. Oh, God damn. Yum! It's so good! I won't go any further into the plot of Get Jiro because ultimately I do give it my recommendation and I don't want to spoil the whole thing for you. There was a sequel/prequel for Get Jiro that's good, but I prefer the original. The second book sort of explains some of Jiro's origins, which is cool, but I like the original version because he's just this sort of unknowable guy with only a barely hinted at past. He's very soft-spoken. He kind of reminds me of the character Clint Eastwood played in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. What's interesting about Bourdain's comic Get Jiro, its sequel, and the recent books he did this year with Dark Horse is that it uses his expertise but isn't designed as a future project for him to star in. The sad fact is, at least half of the comics written by celebrities are clearly being created to introduce an intellectual property that can then be turned into a movie starring that celebrity. Sam Jackson's book, Cold Space, that features a character that looks just like him. Tyrese's Mayhem, same story. By the way, that did not get good reviews. Actress Rashida Jones, she created a book called Frenemy of the State about a wealthy socialite who is basically hired by the CIA to become a spy. That actually was sold to Hollywood before the first issue was even fully printed. What's another one? Oh, Mark Hamill. I love Mark Hamill. He, for years, was trying to get a movie called Black Pearl made that he would direct. And in 1997, Dark Horse finally published it as a 5-issue comic book series. It's a fairly ordinary story about a vigilante and how the media just latches onto it and sort of makes him into a celebrity, makes him into a bigger deal than he is. It's only okay, and I say that as a guy that really likes and appreciates most of what Mark Hamill has created. A bit more rare are stories where a celebrity simply has a good idea that they want developed into a comic book. Actor Tom Jane co-wrote a limited series called Bad Planet about an alien protecting modern-day Earth from an alien invasion. He said he was on painkillers and had feverish dreams of spider aliens, so he approached Tim Bradstreet, who had made Punisher artwork based on Jane's movie version, and they collaborated with others to bring his vision to life. Director Kevin Smith has always had a fondness for comic books and self-published several stories based on his movie's characters. And then he went to work for Marvel and DC, writing characters like Daredevil and Green Arrow. He didn't design them to be movie scripts, he just tried to write a good story about the characters. Gerard Way, the lead singer of My Chemical Romance, created the dysfunctional superhero family book Umbrella Academy with artist Gabriel Ba. He's written several volumes of the book to widespread acclaim. Now, your mileage may vary in terms of how much you enjoy the work of those past 3 authors that I just mentioned. Personally, I really like the work of Gerard Way with Umbrella Academy. I think that that's a really good comic. I recommend that one. But I think that what works for those 3 in terms of having comic books that were at least well received critically and sold well in the past is that their goal was just to create a good comic book. So if you start with that in mind, you've got a chance at making a good comic book. If you come at it from the perspective of, I want to just create an intellectual property, I really want it to be a movie, but I'll make it as a comic book just as a proof of concept, I think you can be doomed before it even begins. There was a recent story that's sort of an example of this, although it's in animation. Dave Johnson is a comic book artist, and he's also worked in animation, designing characters for animation studios like Titmouse. So, just a couple days ago, he told this story of an unnamed celebrity that was clearly Vin Diesel, who wanted to make a movie based on Hannibal, the conqueror, the Carthaginian general from, I don't know, like 247 BC maybe, or maybe that's when he was born, but somewhere around there, Hannibal the general. It's an interesting story. I can totally understand why Vin Diesel would want to make a movie about it. He was having trouble getting it started, so he decided that he would have it created as an animation. And even though he's got somebody really talented like Dave Johnson creating really amazing designs that look fantastic for animation, his idea, of course, was that it should be like, a realistic, cool movie. So he kept fiddling with the designs. We haven't seen what those are, but apparently they didn't look as good for animation, and the whole project fell apart. Well, folks, that's going to do it for this episode. Next week, I'm back with a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. I feel like letterers never get the consideration that they're due. Lettering is an amazing, amazing part of making a good comic book. So that will be, to a degree, what the topic is next week. I hope you enjoy that. We have some fan art this week. We have this piece by Ashley, who also goes by the name Foof Bingo online. I got a big kick out of it. It's kind of adorable. So thank you, Ashley. I was also sent 2 pieces of fan art by 2 different viewers, but they're not specifically about comic tropes. So usually I wouldn't show this, but just for the heck of it, let's take a look at what they've got. This is a Venom piece by somebody who goes by the name The Schmershed Hatter 187. It does look pretty cool. He says that he's proud of it because he did not trace it or use any reference. And then there's this piece that's pretty funny about Rhino and Juggernaut going up against each other. That's by someone with the screen name B2D. Now, normally I don't have time to share just regular artwork. Specifically, I show fan art for comic tropes, but I thought I'd just include those just for the heck of it. But there was only one person that did fan art for comic tropes specifically this week, so I'm reaching into the bag of Gachapon. Okay, we've got this piece for you, Foof, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. Does that make sense? Oh, you know what it is? I think it's some sort of giant robot that you assemble. I don't know if it's a Gundam or just something like that, but this is from Japan, and that's for you for sending that piece of fan art in. If you have fan art about comic tropes, just send it to comictropes@gmail.com. I will show it. If you have a link to, say, a portfolio or social media, you can include that, and I'll show that in the screen next to your drawing. Or painting or illustration, whatever kind of artwork you create. Who knows? Maybe it's a decorated cake. That would be unique. Anyway, I've had fun talking about this. It's a little sad to talk about something like this. I'm just going off script now. I liked Anthony Bourdain. I remember reading Kitchen Confidential back when it came out. I was just commuting to work, and I was reading a lot of books at the time, and I read that one kind of at random, and I found it fascinating. It was a really interesting look at the restaurant world. That was my first real look at what it's like behind the scenes. Great guy, I mean, he wanted to feed people. He wanted to explore other cultures and show what we have in common and try new things. Those are all like really positive attributes. But apparently, he was dealing with depression this whole time, and he killed himself. And I'm very sensitive to that because I also suffer severely from depression. I have to take medication. I have to take a lot of steps to deal with it, and it's a constant battle. So it's very serious. I hope that someday there are even more tools for those of us that are dealing with depression to give us, the help that we need. But until then, if you are feeling especially down, definitely know that there's the suicide hotline. There's that number. And, they're not going to tell you to do anything. They're just going to listen to you. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, fairly serious ending to the episode. But the comic book Get Jiro does get my recommendation. There are a few others by celebrity creators that I have enjoyed. I've enjoyed some of Kevin Smith's writing. Some of it I really dislike, and some of it I really do like. I overall liked his original run on Daredevil. I liked a lot of his View Askewniverse comics. I think that they were pretty funny. And I think that Gerard Way's Umbrella Academy is really strong. If you count comedians like Paul Scheer and Brian Posehn and guys like that, celebrities, and I do, Patton Oswalt. There's a lot of comedians that have written books for Marvel in the last few years, and I generally find them really, really funny. I think that Paul Scheer's comic book of Deadpool going up against Brute Force was hilarious because I remember in the 80s reading the Brute Force 4-issue miniseries. All right, I'm starting to drone. And I really need to rinse this Pam taste out of my mouth, so I'm going to take off. But remember, until next time, keep reading comics.